it's always a bit humbling to kind of hear intros of yourself, and sort of impressive. Like you're like, wow, I sort of did most of that. But I have some notes because I'm not sort of burdened by a lack of descriptive words. So this actually keeps me on track as opposed to off track. When I kind of look back on some of those things that I was able to contribute to and participate in, it's really interesting because this room, as I mentioned when I came in, was probably the source of the single greatest tragedy in my life, which was my moot. And I remember being in here, and it's funny, I'm actually kind of speaking to all of you because I was terrified of public speaking, absolutely terrified. And I had to do my moot. And second year, is that when moot happens? Second or third? It was around that time for me. And I remember I was sitting right there and presenting, and the panel was here looking at me, and one was my teaching advisor, I guess, was participating as one of the judges, and looked at me and just mouthed, as I was sitting there, and just said, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, I think I'm okay. So hopefully I've grown a bit and developed a bit since then, but it's been a great ride. I think Western has absolutely prepared me for so much of what I've been able to experience in my career, and hopefully will continue to do so. So it's a real privilege and for me to be able to come and talk to all of you, because I look at all of you and all of the great things that I know that you're going to do. You may not know it yet, but I know it, and Dean Chamberlain knows it, and it's great to see you at this stage of your career. So if there's anything that you can take from what I say, please, that means a lot to me, but it's also a great experience for me to be able to talk to you at this stage of your career. So we can keep this open and as flexible as you want. I know we've got a Q&A plan for the end, and if you want to stop me at any moment and ask any particular questions, please do, and I can go deeper in any particular point. So a little bit about me, as Dean Chamberlain mentioned, I got into I followed the wave of articling, summaring and articling. I practiced corporate commercial law first here in London it was Harrison Elwood at the time, Harrison Pensa now, and then moved to Toronto and worked in financial services at Blake's. I often say that law taught me how to think, and everything I did in my post-law career taught me what to think about. But I would not have been able to do anything that I've been able to do without having this grounding, both here and in the practice. So, but it did come to a point where I realized there was other things that I wanted to do, and I wanted to really get in on the front end of business transactions. I was in financial services, so a lot of things that I saw were ideas that people had. So they're looking for financing to do things with, to build businesses. And I was always really interested in what they wanted to do, and became less interested in sort of facilitating it. And so what I decided to do was to get in on the other side of the transaction. I came back to school, came back to Western. I did my MBA at Ivy, and then really needed to reinvent myself as a business person. What I failed to recognize, I think I was overconfident and very naive, that I really needed to learn how to be a business person. And so I went into the consulting industry, which for me was really like on-the-job training. I almost looked at it like a practical aspect or extension of my MBA. But I worked in Australia for a year and a half, which it's very difficult to spend only a year and a half in Australia. If any of you have been there, especially when you're single, and but that's not part of the program today. So, but I came back and worked for the Boston Consulting Group and got involved in some really, really interesting stuff. And then really decided that I wanted to follow kind of my passion, which was to be involved in businesses that really affected people. So there's a variety of things that all of us have the opportunity to do, and we all have choices to make. And you hear people that say if you kind of love what you do, then you're not really working, and sort of cliches like that. But I really do believe that you're going to be much better at what you do if you love what you do. And what I love doing is ultimately affecting people and individuals. And there's a variety of ways to do that. Sports was one that I was very familiar with growing up. I grew up around in a kind of a sporting household, and so I was familiar with the environment. But it wasn't to be a fan that I wanted to get involved in sports. It was really because I looked at the industry and thought that this is something that can really benefit from some conventional and traditional thinking that exists in other industries. And sports was a bit of a laggard in terms of how it structured itself and how it operated. And if you could take some of the things that I'd seen from working in some of the other areas I'd worked and applied them to sports, you can really make an impact. And so I didn't get an opportunity immediately, and it was tough. And I did the networking cycles, and so anybody that's experiencing hitting some roadblocks, it's not going to be the last time you're going to experience that, and don't let it discourage you from continuing to push forward. It was several years. I didn't get my first job in sports at the CFL until I was 35. I worked at Molson. Was a cool experience for me. I mean, it was an industry to me that was very analogous to a sports industry. I mean, you had teams which were essentially, the competitors, Labatt and Molson and Sleeman. You had, the players, which were sort of the brands. You looked at the standings every day, which was your market share. So there was really a similar way of kind of looking at the business, and it intrigued me, and I learned a lot from it. But I kept plugging away, putting the word out, and looking for opportunities in sports, and ultimately got the opportunity with the CFL in 2006. So I joined the CFL as a chief operating officer. It was the most diplomatic way I can say. It was a tire fire at the time that I got involved. There were a couple franchises had gone bankrupt, Hamilton and Toronto, in the 2 years prior to me joining. 3 months into my term, the Ottawa Renegades went bankrupt. We had to redo the schedule to change it from a 9-team schedule to an 8-team schedule. The governance was a mess, the board, and there was friction within the ownership. But I looked at this and said, if everything's really going swimmingly somewhere, then it really doesn't create an opportunity for you oftentimes. You don't see a lot of people searching for jobs when everything's going well. It's usually when businesses or organizations need help with something and need help navigating through an issue that you find opportunities. So I think you have to be courageous and bold and believe in yourself and have the confidence that you can make that difference and make the contribution that they're looking for. And so that's what I did. And we accomplished some very good things through just perseverance and commitment and vision and kind of believing in what we were trying to achieve. And I will say, I know I appreciate that the CFL isn't as strong a brand here in Ontario, Southern Ontario, as it is in the rest of the country. It's an absolute birthright in other parts of the country. The television ratings for the CFL dramatically outpace the TV ratings for TFC, for the Raptors, and even will compare against some Leafs or other hockey regional ratings. So when I talk about the CFL, I know oftentimes people here will look at it and think of it as a little bit lesser than what it truly is across the country. But for me, I also recognize that. I grew up in Brampton, suburban Toronto, I fully understood kind of what the position with the brand was, but what I wanted to do was to change that. And I really wanted to take the brand and try to replicate the meaning that it once had in Toronto and that it currently has in other cities across Canada. So it was sort of believing in the vision and having this really daunting task. I really sort of like taking on incredibly challenging, daunting, kind of fearful issues because they're more fun when you achieve them. And this was one of them. So what I want to share with you are just, this is a leadership discussion, and I think there are some keys to modern leadership. I'll talk about in the context of my time at the CFL and my time with the Argonauts. And I hope that you can take some of this away because you are all leaders and you will become even greater leaders as your career progresses. But I call them the 3 C's. I was once told that using alliteration in speeches is quite effective. So I call them the 3 C's, but I think they work in this regard. And what I will say is they're not, these are elements of leadership. These are not necessarily essential elements of achievement. All of you can achieve individually. You can do great things on your own. These are lessons that I've learned, that I've taken from my career, that are essential to being a great leader in an organization. So if you want to lead other people, if you want to lead a broader team, which I think tends to be essential to achieving a broader goal, then you have to be a leader to do that. So some of these things, it's really commitment, collaboration, and communication. And you can step back and say, well, there's ways that I've achieved things without collaborating with others, with doing what I believe in and doing it alone, without necessarily needing to communicate with others because it slows me down. You can do that, and you can be successful, but you won't be a leader. And you certainly won't be effective if you're leading large organizations. So when I talk about these commitment, that really translates to, in plain speak, is knowing what you want. So it's having a vision, having a confidence and a belief in that vision from the start. And with that, you need to have that grounding because as you go through any process, that is going to be challenged. And there are going to be times when you're presented with circumstances that make you question yourself, that make you question the direction you're given to others. But if you start with a very firm belief, then that is going to carry you through those times. So commitment is knowing what you want. You have to remain flexible and agile, but you don't want to be distracted. And that allows you to maintain that focus. Collaboration is the second, and collaboration essentially means don't always try to be the hero. There's a time, I think, in all of our lives where we think that success means proving to somebody that we can do something alone. And in school, oftentimes, you're measured by the marks that are attributed to you as an individual. So it sort of reinforces that. You have this individual perspective on things. As you get out into the real world, and as you rise up in the ranks and become more senior in an organization, I think what you're going to realize is it's not about you. It's about what you're trying to do for the organization that you're part of. So collaboration is absolutely critical to achieving that. And one way to put it is none of us is strong as some of us together. You will bring forward fantastic ideas, but others will too. And you're going to serve yourself better by collaborating, by incorporating those ideas, by being receptive to them, by being open to them. I mean, yours will be integral to the solution, but by engaging others, I think you're going to realize that you're going to be much more successful as you go along. And the third is communication. And communication really gets to the fact that uncertainty in anything creates confusion, and you want to keep people in the loop. You can't consult everyone or include everyone in the leadership process, but especially in the world we live in today, there's an increasing requirement to communicate with just about everyone. And what it does is you get their buy-in through the process, which is essential, and you pave the way for execution. And execution's critical because execution is what's going to get you to the achievement of your end goal, the achievement of your vision, the vision that you're committed to. And that's what we're talking about. You know, leadership is, by its definition, leading towards the achievement of a goal. And that's what we're talking about today. So 3 examples from my role at the CFL. Some of these are a little bit dated, but I still think they're relevant. The first I'll talk about is the NFL threat. The NFL has been a constant threat to the CFL. They're, you know, obviously kind of being in the shadow of the most successful professional sports organization in the world is daunting. I often said during my time at the CFL, it's unfortunate that we both happen to play football because otherwise there'd be 0 comparisons between the CFL and the NFL. But Pierre Trudeau, so the dad, not the son, described being Canadian living next to the US as being a mouse sleeping next to an elephant. And that's something that really resonated with us. And in the early days of around 2006, 2007, I actually led an initiative with the NFL to try to develop a joint working relationship. So to really try to integrate the businesses, because the CFL's business model wasn't working. And there was a real opportunity to think differently about how it could define itself and structure itself. And we had some very deep level talks that included the commissioner, Commissioner Goodell, and his senior team. And we were really progressing well, going down the road towards creating a potential business combination between the 2 leagues. And literally got a sort of a phone call that said, hey, have you heard about this cool Bills in Toronto series where the Buffalo Bills are going to play regular season games in Toronto at a Rogers Centre? So the Bills played over a 5-year period, did a deal with Rogers to play a regular season home game and a preseason game in Rogers Centre. This was not an NFL initiative. It was a Buffalo Bills and Rogers initiative as they were trying to increase their corporate market and extend their fan base outside of Buffalo and the Niagara Peninsula into the Toronto area. But what it did is it really it raised the issue of the NFL threat to almost panic levels within our fan base, within our ownership group. And it really caused a lot of people to kind of look inward and question kind of how do we deal with this. But the thing for us when we were approaching this was, so, you know, we needed to be committed to our vision. And what was our vision? It was about success and sustainability. That's what we wanted for the CFL. What form that took, we could be open. But we knew it was about success and sustainability, and we believed very firmly that the CFL and the Canadian game and the importance it places in the history of the country was something that we wanted to preserve. And we were committed to that vision. In terms of collaboration, we understood what we wanted to achieve with our vision, but we reached out to our teams, we reached out to our sponsors, we reached out to government, and our fans to determine how best to achieve it. So we had gone down the road towards one path. The circumstances had changed, and now we really had to sort of gather all of the stakeholders. And in a league, in a sports league, there's, it can sometimes be the size of the brand can sometimes outpace the size of the business, and that was certainly the case with the CFL. Massive brand. Smaller business relative to that brand. But when you have a lot of people interested in what you're doing, it really means that you have to collaborate and engage them in the process. So we went out and we realized through talking to the people that shared our belief in the viability and the future of the league, that our best defense was a good offense. And so what we did is we developed a marketing campaign, and it was called This Is Our League. And it was interesting because This Is Our League was originally intended to be an internal marketing campaign. So it gets to the third piece to an extent of communication. But what we were trying to do is first get everybody that was internally involved in the CFL, our staff at the league office, the staff at all the teams, to understand what we were about and to start to make decisions in an aligned fashion so that there'd be consistency in all of our touch points. And so This Is Our League was about inclusiveness. So it was about, it's his league, it's her league, it's their league, and with the diverse fabric of Canada, it really represented that. I mean, the one thing about the CFL that you can't take away from it, it is really deeply embedded in the communities, and then the players are out more so than any other professional players. And so we're really trying to talk about the community aspect of it. But it took on a bit of a new meaning. This Is Our League became a little bit of a national sort of patriotism play where we're talking about like ownership, and we ran with that. And what we did was we were faced with media inquiries, fan inquiries, when they saw us boldly coming out with this campaign, saying, kind of literally waving the flag in the face of this sort of incursion of the NFL into our market. And we said, listen, this is who we are, and we like who we are, and we're going to continue being who we are, and we're not going to worry about what they do. But we had to communicate what that meant and why we thought we were going to be successful. And it was through that communication that people understood and they bought in, and they continued to distribute and convey the message. So it really ended speculation, it ended conjecture, and it provided some clarity. It didn't guarantee anything. It opened, people could criticize, people could have an opinion on it, but they knew what we were doing. And then over time, they could judge that based on the success we had, and that was a very successful campaign. The Bills and Toronto series ended unsuccessful. I'm an NFL fan, so this isn't about not wanting the NFL to be successful. This was more wanting for our priorities being the sustainability and success of the CFL to be prioritized. And I think through that process we achieved it. But it took all three things. We had to go into it being firmly committed to our belief. We had to collaborate with everyone involved in the process to understand what the issues were and being aligned to the solution. And we had to communicate that out so people understood what we were doing and got behind us and supported us along the way. Second example I'll use, which is I try to bring something in that has some legal relevance, is our collective bargaining agreement negotiations. So I've negotiated 3 collective bargaining agreements during my term at the CFL. The last one we did, or the second last one we did in 2010 was absolutely transformational in terms of the business foundation for the league. So we, the commitment we had was to build a fair and responsible deal. And we would say that to the media, and of course everybody's going to say that to the media, but we truly believed it. We believe in the strength of our players. We want our players to be fairly compensated. We want our players to work in as safe an environment as possible. We want them to be committed to our league, but we also have to do things that make for a responsible, sustainable business model for the league. And so we went in as a group, as an ownership group, because you're naturally sort of pitted against the players' union as sort of the other side of the table. But we took the time to make sure that, is this a consistent vision that we all have? Because if it isn't, when the tension comes in and the pressure comes in, you're going to start breaking apart. So we made sure that we had this unified belief that this is what we're going to do, and this is why it was important to kind of stick to those beliefs through the process. And the key negotiating point in that CBA was the revenue sharing principle. So in all major professional sports leagues, there's a revenue sharing provision where a certain percentage of sports-related revenues have to be paid out to the players in the form of player compensation. The league had such a provision. It was called we call it the 56% rule. So 56% of defined revenues were paid out to the players, and that essentially formed the salary cap. So our position going into bargaining was to eliminate revenue sharing. I remember I first raised this because when I stepped back and I put my consulting hat on and the other things I did, I said, well, you know, if we're basically treading water economically right now and we're only getting 44% of the incremental revenues that we're able to generate, we're never going to be able to dig ourselves out of the hole. So it doesn't make financial sense to do that. So this wasn't about being greedy. It wasn't about trying to keep anyone else down, but it was trying to create a viable model for us all to be successful. We had to get our owners aligned with that. We had to get we had to get the media aligned with that. We had to get our fans aligned with that because we knew the messages were going to come out about, you know, the players who can't earn a living, and we knew that some of the owners who perhaps didn't have as great financial circumstances or had more financial stability than other teams may not have as strong a belief in that principle or an understanding of the importance of it to the strength of the entire league. So we made sure that everybody was galvanized, and that was the commitment part of it, and we clearly established that. But, you know, going in, we also, even though I had that belief, and it was shared by a group of people. Firstly, I was told that I was crazy; it would never happen. And that was by our lead negotiator. We said, well, let's try. Like, this is important. We have to try because I think this is, without being overly dramatic, I think it's vital to the very existence of the league. And so, but we knew we needed to collaborate with people within our league, and this is where the collaboration part comes in. So we struck a labor relations committee, and we engaged our general managers, we engaged our coaches, we engaged our owners, and in that process, some of it was just talking about the technicalities of what the relationships between players and teams were, but it was also getting to those deeper questions of you know, what will this mean? How do you see the future of the league playing out? What do you want it to be like? And collaborating on that vision. But it was a lot of discussion. And so, you know, I'd say you need to consult and empower an inner circle of people that has the trust and respect of the overall organization. Because another thing that happens is when it gets down to crunch time and you have to make a recommendation on something, even if that idea is completely yours, even if you did all of the legwork yourself, if you go into a room of stakeholders and all of you are going to be dealing with boards of directors, if you're working in a business capacity, you're going to be working with others that are going to be making ultimate decisions, others that are intelligent and experienced and confident. Would you rather go in there by yourself, or would you rather go in there with a team of people around you, all of whom that group respects and trusts and has worked with? Because I know where I'm placing my money on which presentation is going to be more successful. So collaborating, building a team effort, building a team approach, sharing the ideas is going to take you much, much further than trying to plow through things on your own. I completely appreciate the Leafs jerseys. The third part of the CBA was communication. So we had to make sure that everybody understood what we were doing all along the way. Because when you're negotiating something as sensitive as a CBA, it becomes rich owners, you know, want to crush the players. You start creating fractures within your own ownership group, within your own football operations groups. So, you know, when people start thinking there could be a work stoppage, you know, players and coaches, you know, they're worried about their own income, staff, and all of this can lead to confusion. It can lead to a lack of alignment. It can lead to people making irrational decisions and taking irrational actions. So the more communication that you can have throughout a process like this whether it's a negotiation of a CBA, whether it's a project you're doing at school, whether it's a broader initiative that you're doing, whether in the community or in a work setting, the more that you keep people informed about what you're doing and why, the more that you're going to keep people along the track and along the path that you want to take them down. And trying to keeping information closed in because you want to protect it, because you don't want people to get in your kitchen, I find it almost always leads to a bad result. You're better to be transparent, to be open, to be engaging, and to accept the criticism, to accept the feedback, to accept the comments and deal with it. Because oftentimes, one, you're going to be able to convince people to your side of the argument, and two, you might learn something that you didn't otherwise know. And it might help you to be a bit more agile and flexible in your approach. So absolutely, communication's critically important. The third example I'll use is the Argos. So I joined the Argos in the fall of 2015. They had played. It was one of the least successful years in the history of the franchise. And for those of you not really up to speed on Argos history, it's the oldest professional sports team in North America. Was at a time in the 60s and 70s getting consistently 40,000 plus people out to the old C&E Stadium on the exhibition grounds where BMO Field now sits. The CFL was paying players salaries higher than the NFL was. And so it was a real, foundation element of the Toronto sports landscape. And then over the years, it had generally lost its way. And there's a variety of reasons for that. We could have a separate discussion on that alone. But with the rise of media and media distribution, particularly driven by the NFL, and spillover of signals from the US, and seeing television and the production of games brought to you in ways you never experienced before, from a competing brand, necessarily limited the strength of the brand we had right at home. So you're watching kind of Bills games and Cleveland Browns games, and the NFL was changing sports globally. And in Southern Ontario, we had a barrage of that, and at the time when the CFL had taken the approach to black out their games on television to try to drive viewership. So it was sort of a marriage of two different approaches that really the CFL suffered from for decades. And in 2015, the Argos played 5 of their home games on the road, if that makes sense. They shared Rogers Centre with the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays were on a playoff run, and they got evicted from the stadium, so they played home games in Hamilton, which, if any of you know the rivalry between Toronto and Hamilton, it's cats and some, I guess we'll call the Argos dogs in this respect. But so it was awful for the brand. Attendance was at an all-time low. Revenues were down. And I was approached to run the team. So that sounds fantastic. But I had come from a 10-year period at the CFL where, as I mentioned, my goal was to try to turn this into something that I believed it could be. And it certainly wasn't. And I think we made a lot of progress at the CFL level about rebuilding the foundation and putting it on the path to success. Where I didn't, the last major area that needed to be addressed was Toronto, and to an extent Hamilton, but more so Toronto. And I realized personally that I couldn't, I believed I had a very unique view on how that could be done, but I didn't have the ability to do it from where I sat at the league office. You had to be at the team level to really affect that type of change and to make those type of decisions. So one thing was commitment. So when we talk about the 3 C's of leadership again, so the commitment for me was being absolutely committed to my belief that the Argos could be a successful, thriving franchise amongst the Toronto sports teams. I believed that then, I believe that now. It's exceptionally difficult. It's going to take a long time, but I think under the right conditions, it can be. And I think right now, what you have to challenge yourselves to do is don't think of it in its current form. You have to think about it in the form that you're trying to develop it into. My belief was I wanted the Argos to essentially be Toronto's NCAA football team. So I wanted the Argonauts to be the Michigan Wolverines or the Ohio State Buckeyes or the USC Trojans of the city of Toronto, which when you think about it is all about community, it's all about local pride, it's about absolute passionate, commitment to the brand. It's about event experience, which when you have 9 home games is something that you absolutely can deliver, and football can deliver in ways that the indoor sports can't. We brought in tailgating as an initiative to try to recreate what it meant to experience a sporting event in Toronto. We were the first team to essentially legalize tailgating. But I believed in that. And I believed in that because I've been going to Michigan games for 25 years and have loved the experience. And if you haven't been and have the opportunity to go, you should do it. So I believed in it. And that was the commitment. And that I knew that we were in for very, very difficult days ahead. But with that in mind, I knew that it was going to carry us through the difficult times. Another thing I sort of like to say, and this sort of transcends this discussion a little bit, but there's only one way that you will guarantee failure for yourselves, and that's by not trying something. So if you have a daunting challenge and you think you might fail and you choose not to do it, then you will fail by definition. So if you want to be certain that you'll fail, don't do it. If you want to have a chance of succeeding, then give yourself a shot at succeeding. You may not, but you may. And so, we knew it would be difficult, but we were committed to what we believed would be what could happen, what would be spectacular when it did. Collaboration, we knew, I had a deep held belief. My SVP of business operations, Sarah Moore, who ran marketing events for the CFL, who came over to run the business operations for the Argos, shared that belief. But we knew that it just, the two of us alone weren't going to be able to, get this across the line. We needed this to be deeply rooted and shared by everyone. And although, I learned you can be confident in your belief, and you can believe that you're most often going to be right. And I think probably everyone in this room shares that quality, and that's why you're all here, is because you're all distinguished people, you're exceptional students, you've risen above your peers at probably everything you've tried to do, and you have a belief and a track record of achieving through relying on yourself. And you should be confident in that, and continue to be confident in that. But what I would say is it's perilous to assume that will be the case. So continue to believe in yourself, continue to follow your own path, but engage others in the process. Because there's things that you will learn from people that you absolutely won't expect. There's people that have come to me after games that, you would stereotype them as being underachievers or, whatever sort of derogatory negative term you can think of, that might have provided me with the absolute golden nugget idea that we will implement to make massive change. And if I didn't take the time to stop and talk to those people, and if you don't take the time to engage people that you dismiss as not being able to make a contribution, you're going to miss out on those opportunities. You're going to miss out on the opportunity to take credit for their ideas, which I've made a career on. So we consulted with fans, we consulted with other teams, our players, our coaches, our staff on what needed to be done in Toronto. And anyone who had the energy to make a contribution, we talked to. I put my trust in the ideas of others. And the other really thing it did is we knew that an initiative like this, we needed everybody to get on board. I mean, it's a public product. You know, we needed mass consumption, and so we needed people to be engaged. So when you bring people in and you share ideas with them and you share the process with them and help them to contribute, they become engaged, and they buy in. They become ambassadors, and it's, you know, it's a bit like a crowdfunding of ideas. And the more that you can facilitate this process of generating ideas, I think the more successful you're going to be. And remember, what we're talking about is leadership here, right? We're talking about leading a group of people towards the achievement of a goal. So if you plow ahead, you know, you're naturally going to get resistance. The more people you have behind pushing you along, the further you're going to go. And, you know, the other thing I'll say is the more fun it's going to be when you get there. Achieving things with a team and having the contribution of many is way more fun than accomplishing something on your own. And, you know, understanding when to loosen the reins and to maybe get outside of your comfort zone, and to give some responsibility to others to make decisions. Great leaders empower others to contribute, and I would strongly encourage you to keep that in mind. And in terms of the Argos communication as well, we communicated every step of the way. Progress was not evident at all. Everything we did was sort of, I liken it to, you know, when you're building a house, you know, the hard parts. When you drive by, you know, a beautiful neighborhood and you see a beautiful house, you're looking at the roof line and you're looking at the front door and you're looking at the paned windows, but nobody's thinking about the people who had the rubber boots on and were slugging the concrete to put the foundation in place, right? And that's what's holding that house up. That's not the glamorous job, but you have to be. That's really what we experienced, and we were subject to a lot of criticism, a lot of input. People were impatient, people were critical, people were, I think, frustrated by the lack of progress shown in the past. All of that, if you think about it, comes from a good place, because it comes from people that care. It comes from people that want to see change, and if you can embrace that and sort of change the lens and how to look at that, you can actually turn it into something really good. So we took the opportunity to really tell people what we were doing all the way. And not only external people, so our fans in general in media, but it was talking to our key stakeholders, our key season ticket holders, our core fans. I would get absolutely shredded on our fan forums, like personally on our fan forums. So it got to the point that I'd be reading them and just throwing up my hands like, oh my God, like what can I do? Like that guy's totally wrong. And the whole trolls on social media, I've been attacked by trolls. And it's very, very true. And so what I said was, well, like we can either tune them out, but that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense because these are the most passionate consumers of our product, right? Like, as ridiculous and irrational they may be, they're the ones that really care about what we're doing. So tuning them out doesn't seem to be the right idea. So what we did is we took the 20 or 40 people, we did in 2 stages, that were contributing the most to social media and to the fan forums. And we brought them into our office. We invited them in, and we brought a case of beer in, and we ordered pizza, and we sat in a big circle and we talked. And at the end of 3 hours, everybody understood where everybody stood on any issue. We had the opportunity to explain to them why we were doing things in the way that we were doing them. If there were things that they wanted to see happen, we could explain why they weren't, or why they haven't seen it yet, but they may see it soon. They had a much greater understanding of the challenges that we faced. How we were thinking about things, and it was incredible how the tone changed on the message boards. You know, detractors became supporters. You know, so that sort of melds the whole collaboration and communication pieces together. But it really started to bring people in and make them feel that they could contribute to the solution. But it also helped us to say, okay, this is what we're doing, here is where we are. And it wasn't just fans, it was also our staff. Because sometimes if you're at a certain level of an organization, you have to remember that people below you wouldn't have the level of insight into things that are happening to the degree you do. So they might be worried about their jobs. They might not see progress and wonder what that means. And by taking the time to sit down and talk to them, it puts their mind at ease, which means they're much more or much less tethered in ability to contribute to what you're trying to do than they would have others been if they're, panicking and strife with worry, or perhaps even leaving an organization. So communicating is critically important at all times. And one example, and I'll give, which is sort of directly related to our team. I've talked a lot about the business parts. After the 2016 season, I restructured our football operations department. I brought in a new general manager, brought in a new head coach, full new coaching staff, and thankfully it worked out in the way that it did. But our coach was and is Mark Trestman. So Mark Trestman has a long career in the NFL as a coordinator. He joined the Montreal Alouettes, became an incredibly successful coach with Montreal, won 2 Grey Cups. From that, he became the head coach of the Chicago Bears, working with Jay Cutler, and then I had the opportunity to bring him back into the CFL. One thing that distinguishes Mark from other coaches, all coaches know how to scheme. All coaches know the game. They live and breathe the game. He does too. He's a genius. He's a lawyer, actually. But that's not what distinguished him in my mind. And what distinguished him was his ability to communicate. And if you watched him, what he did is he absolutely relentlessly would preach unity and team and selflessness and trust in the person in the locker room beside you, and having faith in the system. And he would do, and it wasn't always, sometimes he did it as a father figure, sometimes he did it with the whip, sometimes he was absolutely vicious, sometimes he was incredibly sensitive, but the message was always consistent, that we have to be together as a team. We have to all believe in what we're trying to do and the way that we're going to do it if we're going to be successful. And as I watched this, it was really interesting because I had not had the opportunity to watch somebody like this do this in this way. And it was in the Grey Cup last year, did anyone watch the Grey Cup? I'm not offended if you didn't, okay. It was an absolutely miraculous comeback that we had in the last 5 minutes of the game. I mean, we were on the mat in a chokehold and out of it, and we came back with 2 just plays that you wouldn't see if you did them 100 times over. We recovered a fumble. They were driving, they were on the 3-yard line about to score. They were up by, I can't even remember now, but if they had scored this touchdown, the game was over. We forced a fumble on the 3-yard line, ran the fumble back, longest return in CFL history. Tied the game. Are you a Stampeder fan? No. Because you're grimacing over there. Are you? Well, that's even worse. The longest team without a championship. I like their chances this year, though. And then we came down, kicked a field goal to tie the game. Calgary had the ball with a minute left, marching down the field. Essentially needed to, actually they were down by a field goal, needed to kick a field goal to send it into overtime. And they got into field goal range. There's 30 seconds left on the clock. So, virtually guaranteed that we're now going to overtime. Calgary was by far the most dominant team in the league all year. Their quarterback was MVP caliber quarterback, Bo Levi Mitchell. and they basically got down to they were about the 20-25 yard line with 10 seconds left in the game, and so they had 2 plays to run. And normally you'd think, okay, you have a throwaway play, and then you kick the field goal. So everybody knows what's happening. If you have that throwaway play, you might as well go for the end zone, because if they score, they win the Grey Cup. So they did exactly, and you generally run a post pattern where you throw it into the corner. You put your best receiver, who's a leaper, who can go up and grab the ball, and you got a greater than 50% chance of winning the game. So our guys read that play. They did exactly what we thought they were going to do. We intercepted the ball, and the game was over. So it was crazy, like unbelievably crazy. But getting back to the communication piece, the reason why I think that happened, the reason why I think we hung in to force that fumble, return that ball, make the field goal that put us up by 3, hang in when all the odds were against us, was because all of that communication that was drilled into the team for the whole year, everyone believed in the common vision. Everyone felt that they knew what we could achieve. They knew how to do it. They knew that if they remained as a team, if they remained composed and confident in their ability to affect the result, that we'd be successful. And they stuck with it. And what that translated to is the guys stuck with the play. They believed they could force that fumble. And I don't. It sounds sort of cliche, and you expect athletes to always do that. But I've seen other teams and players and situations where players do give up, and they do lose belief, and they do lose the faith, and they start infighting with other teammates, and that's where teams come apart. Where our team came together in the most critical moment of the season, and it was interesting to watch, and it was interesting to trace that back to that just didn't come by accident. It came by a really concerted, diligent, relentless effort by our coach to drill that into our players. And I think you can do that within your organizations. I mean, you create the belief in what you want to achieve, you engage everybody in the solution to getting there, and then you relentlessly communicate with them about where you're at in the process at every step. And that eventually is going to lead you to good things. And that's sort of what I've learned. This is probably a good time we can kind of show the video and a little bit from that Grey Cup. And then we can have a few questions.
Getting ready. 2nd and 5. Mitchell getting inside.
And it is now my honor and my privilege to present the trophy to this year's Grey Cup champions, the Toronto Argonauts.
See, yo, we back! We're bringing the cup back home!